Good morning. My name is Megan Moser. I am the Chicago branch president of AAUW. Thank you for being here today. We are looking forward to hearing from our AAUW Fellows and grantees. A big thank you to Kate Skagg and Elaine Fisher from the Jane Addams Online AAUW branch for co-sponsoring the program and expert technical help with the Zoom program. Thank you also to Helen Elkus of the Chicago branch for inviting our fellows to present to us today. A couple of housekeeping rules as it states on your screen. Please stay mute during the program. We will have questions and answers after each fellow's presentation, and please ask any questions by using the chat feature. The AAUW funds, as one of the world's largest source of funding exclusively for graduate women, supports aspiring scholars around the globe, teachers and activists in local communities, women at critical stages of their careers, and those pursuing professions where women are underrepresented. AAUW Funds is providing nearly $5 million in 2021, 22 in support of 260 scholars. AAUW has been a leading source of funding, providing more than $115 million in fellowships and grants to more than 13,000 women and organizations in the U.S. and around the world. Our recipients include some of the most influential voices of the past 2 centuries, women who have helped shape history, as well as nonprofit organizations at the forefront of driving social change. Our first fellow today is Melissa Mister, Project Director of After School Matters. She is the recipient of the AAUW Community Action Grant here in Chicago, a 1-year grant, and it's for the pre-freshman program in engineering and science. After School Matters pre-freshman program in engineering and science, offered in partnership with the Chicago State University, will provide 90 out-of-school time STEM opportunities to Chicago teenagers. This pre-college program encourages Chicago high school teens to explore STEM by combining academic learning and hands-on, project-based skill development. Team participants will collaborate to create scaled radio, remote control race cars and compete in a simulated student race challenge. Teens will earn a stipend for their participation. Melissa?
Thank you so much, Megan, and thanks everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. All right. So thanks for having me so much. Again, I'm Melissa Mister, and I'm the program officer at After School Matters. And before I get started, I just want to thank AAUW for its support to fund the instructor wages for our pre-freshman program in engineering and science. It is a great program. I wish that we could all go together to go visit the group, because that's the best way to watch the teens in action, to just see how incredibly important it is. And I'll just tell you a little bit more about that program, because then it'll help you understand the context for what ASM does more generally. So the pre-freshman program in engineering and science is at Chicago State University. So it's with one of our university partners, and it's an academic enrichment program. And what it does is expose students to science, technology, engineering, and math, otherwise known as STEM, career opportunities. It provides students with insight into engineering and technical professions, and a lot of what we do is about exposure. So this is all about exposure to the STEM fields, so that teens know whether or not they want to go into those fields for college. If you don't know that it exists, you don't know if you want to be a part of it. So that's an important step. Our program supports pre-college students, so that basically means high school students, and really challenges them to think like scientists and engineers. And our goal is really to prepare them for productive and fulfilling lives through project-based learning and in these fields if they so choose. Again, it's one of many of the programs that ASM provides to Chicago teens. And what we do is we work really hard to provide equitable access to high quality program opportunities. And we want teens to explore their interest in our programs. We want them to develop critical 21st century skills and begin to put all of that together and decide what they'd like to do after they graduate from high school. So our programs fall into 4 major content areas. There are a good percentage of arts programs, STEM programs, sports, and communications and leadership. So this one program is a STEM program, but there's lots and lots of other programs to really offer a range that's going to be attractive to teens. We really do listen to what teens want and try to expose them to things that they may or may not know about already. All of the programs, no matter what their content area focus is, teach teens 21st century learning skills. And those are things like personal mindset. So that's a lot of your kind of resolve to overcome adversity and challenges, and to have the mindset that says that I'm going to work through whatever it is I'm confronted with. planning for success is all about setting a goal and working toward it, realizing that I have to plan in order to get to the end that I'm trying to achieve. Social awareness, just being aware of how I interact with others and being sensitive and responsive to others in a way that's productive for everyone. Verbal communication is huge in our program, so teens getting the confidence to speak in front of others and communicate their ideas and communicate their personal mindset to others. And then problem solving, which is pretty self-explanatory. But I always use the example of one of our dance instructors, who's a wonderful instructor, and he loves dance and eats, breathes, and sleeps dance. But he always says, you know, every one of my teens is not going to be a professional dancer, but they will walk out of here with these 21st century learning skills and able to approach whatever it is they decide to do in a way that's different and improved from having participated in the program. And I have to say that I have a great job in the sense that I get to visit tons of programs all over the city and see teens in action all over the place. And the most common feedback that I get when we visit programs is that the programs help the teens build confidence and helps them feel more comfortable using their voice. I was on a call not too long ago. It was a remote setting where we had some teen leadership council teens on with our board members. And one of the young ladies shared that she's about to go to college. And she said, you know, we've been in remote programs for a while. And she said, and it could be that some of my college courses will be the same way, but she said, I've learned to unmute myself. And that's gonna apply whether or not I'm in this Zoom classroom or if I'm in person. And all of us loved it. We all like stole it and said, we're taking that one with us. Unmute myself, speak up, share my ideas. And she really talked about how her program, which is a leadership program, not only taught her to kind of think about her ideas, exchange ideas with teens who are from different communities than she is, but also to be able to voice them and voice them comfortably and feel like she has a space to do that. So those are just the privilege of being able to visit and hear those kind of things are something that I love to share anytime we're talking about our programs. I think the other piece that's really important about our programs is that all of them provide a stipend to young people. So it's money to make sure that there's not any barrier to their participation. So there's not a fee. No one has to pay to be a part of an After School Matters program. But not only is there not a fee, we're paying you so that if it's that you need to have transportation to get to the program, that's not going to prevent you from participating. If you need to take care of some of your personal needs or you need to contribute in some way to your household, you're able to do that in the program. And you know, if it weren't for the stipend, it could be that teens couldn't participate in programs because they had to work or do other jobs. And it doesn't necessarily take the place of that, but I think it helps to make sure that teens understand that their time and their work is valuable and that we want to make sure that there's nothing that prevents them from participating if they want to. The other thing that I would point out, and this kind of goes along with the stipends, is that we really aim to serve teens from under-resourced Chicago communities. So the large majority of our teens come from communities where most are living at a certain level where, you know, they may not have these opportunities readily available. And so we really try to make sure that our programs are readily accessible to teens from under-resourced communities. We have 3 buildings that are ASM specific buildings. One is on the far south side, the Gately Park facility. One is right downtown, and that one is really important because it allows teens to have a place right in the middle of all the cultural institutions and everything that's going on in Chicago. And one is on the northwest side. But outside of those buildings, there are hundreds and hundreds of programs that happen in Chicago public high schools, that happen in community-based organizations, that happen in libraries and everywhere. And the idea is that, yes, we can have ASM locations where we bring whole groups of kids in different programs together, but we also are accessible to teens who are in different parts of the city who may not want to travel to a different building and would prefer to meet in their own communities or to visit another community. I think another something to point out that's really important is our instructors. Our instructor mentors are clearly incredibly important to what it is that we do. Remember that a big part of ASM programs, like the STEM program, the pre-freshman program, is about exposure. So these are passionate adults who they come from a range of backgrounds. Some are teachers who do this in addition to teaching. Some are professors who do this in addition to being professors. Some are working artists who do this as part of their repertoire of work. Some are you know, chefs, culinary programs outside of being a chef, that kind of thing. So these are professional folks who have not just the real important skills to share with young people, but they also have a passion for youth development and a belief that exposing young people to the range of what all they can do. You know, we like to say it, and I think not just say it, but we really believe that every teen is gifted. It's a matter of their figuring out what's your gift, what's your passion, and having an opportunity to have it tapped into, no matter what it is. So, you know, many young people will try out a variety of different programs and then seize on the one that really appeals to them. Some teens go straight into a painting or a robotics program and realize immediately, this is the one for me. I'm going to stick with it all throughout high school. Whatever that looks like, you've had the opportunity to explore and figure it out. And so we feel really good about being a part of that process for teens. The other thing I'd like to point out is that all of our programs are hands-on project-based programs. So this is a great example. Megan mentioned before some of the contests and things that the young people in the program participate in, and that's such a huge part of it, because it's not about an instructor talking some more. It's more about being a facilitator who is there to provide the opportunity, to provide the right materials, to provide the opportunity to work with your peers. And every single project culminates in some sort of final project, performance, or demonstration. So that in the case of the pre-freshman program, it could be that they're participating in a contest and they're building toward whatever the submission is going to be. In a culinary program, it may be that you're building a menu that will then be served to some population or audience at the end of the program. If you're in a dance program, you might be working toward some sort of dance showcase that happens at the end of the session. But in every case, there's a heavy emphasis on it really being about allowing teens the space and the choice and the opportunity to work with one another towards some goal. And I can't tell you, I could tell you a million different stories about just how proud the young people in programs are of their final projects. So that really is what, in a lot of cases, drives them from the beginning to the end of the program, is this sense that I'm going to be performing at Daily Plaza, or I'm going to be performing at a big event, or that I've got this car that I've built that's going to be a part of this contest at the end of the session, or that I'm going to be speaking in front of a group about the community service project that I've come up with. And so I think it's really important, and it's a real driving force. It's not just because we know that project-based learning is best, it's that it really gives the young people, from what I've experienced, something to look forward to in a big way. I think if I can kind of go a couple different ways in terms of what people are interested in learning more about. Post-secondary success is really important in all of our programs as well, so that all of them, in the process of exposing teens to just different fields and interests, you're also talking and articulating to them what that might look like in terms of a college career after you graduate from high school. And we do try to be open to the fact that not every single teen wants to go to college, but we try to make sure that teens have the opportunity to see people who've done it every which way, right? So that you see where you fit in and what your version might look like. So that we do quite a bit of exposing teens to college visits. Obviously, pre-pandemic, we did a lot of college visits, and post-pandemic, we did a lot of tapping into some of the virtual opportunities. We have a program that specifically takes a group of students through the college going process. So really working through how do you apply and all of that kind of thing. And I've always appreciated the program, but I appreciate it more because I have my own 17-year-old right now, and I realize that it's a huge undertaking, and without supports to walk you through each one of those pieces, it can be daunting, and it can almost, I could see it easily making young people check out, because schools are overburdened and counselors are overburdened. So I think anywhere where we can provide additional supports to help young people through that process, not just the thinking about what they want to do, but then actually getting down to the nitty gritty, doing your applications, navigating the financial aid process and that kind of thing, it's huge. And so we also have programs that help teens work through that and plan for that process so that they can launch successfully into college and career once they finish up. And I think that's honestly a nutshell, and I'd like to give maybe the rest of the time to some of your questions, because I could go deeper on each one of these, but I want to make sure that I'm focused on what the group is most interested in hearing about.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Can everybody hear me? There we go. Great. I have a couple questions in the chat, and I'm Lori Schweitzer from the Chicago branch. So if anybody has any more questions, feel free to add them in the chat and we'll ask them through the program. So one question, well, you do girls and boys. We have a question, yes. How many girls are in the program? How many kids do you have in overall After School Matters, and how many are in this specific STEM program?
Yeah, so let's start with this STEM program. This STEM program serves 30 teens at a time. So 30 teens in the summer and in the fall and in the spring. About 60% of them are girls. And that actually is pretty typical to ASM as a whole. ASM as a whole is roughly 60% women, young women, and 40% boys. So that it's interesting that you asked that question about this program in particular. We have seen over time where there tends to be heavier male presence in some of our STEM programs in terms of interest in everything. This program does a really good job of recruiting young ladies, and it's about 60% girls in this particular program.
And then how many kids are in After School Matters overall?
Yes, so in the course of the year, our summer is our biggest season. This past summer, we had close to 11,000 young people in programs throughout the city. This fall, we've got about 6,500 teens in programs, and we'll again in the spring. Some teens do repeat programs from session to session, which is wonderful. They stick with us again because they're kind of moving around and experimenting with different things, or they found something they love and they decide to stay with it. In a typical year, we probably have about 26,000 opportunities, but within those opportunities, roughly about 16,000 unique teens. So teens who are in a program and may repeat and take advantage of opportunities more than once.
Do you have to be in Chicago Public Schools to be in this program?
You do have to be.
After School Matters.
Yes, so you do have to live in the city of Chicago, and we do primarily serve teens who are attending Chicago Public Schools. There's, charter schools and that kind of thing are caught up in that mix as well. But we do serve only teens who live within the city of Chicago.
Okay. One question here is, what partnerships do you have, and what are your main funding sources?
So our funding is governmental and it's through philanthropy, so we depend heavily on both. So we do get funding, generous funding from the city of Chicago and from the state of Illinois. We do also, though, again, depend very heavily, especially when it comes to our stipends on philanthropic support. The second part, you said the funding sources. Oh, partners. Yes, partners, I'm so glad you asked about partners. Because when you start throwing out those numbers of all the thousands of teens that we serve, we could not do it without some really deep and important partnerships. So about half of our instructors who provide programs are what we call employee instructors. So they work part-time for After School Matters to deliver programming to young people. The other half is made up of CBO partners, so community-based organization partners who work with ASM to provide programming through their community-based organizations. And so we partner with, there's too many to name just on this call, so many CBOs of various sizes. We also partner obviously heavily with Chicago Public Schools. We had a fantastic partnership with the Chicago Housing Authority this summer. But again, in terms of the individual community-based organizations, there are far too many to name, but we value them so much for the content, for their connections to the community, and what they provide, what we're able to provide collaboratively to teens in Chicago. And again, that makes up about 50% of the programming that we offer.
That's wonderful. Just two last questions and then we'll go on. About how long are these programs? And then do you track the participants after they finish the programs or after they graduate from high school?
Yeah, great questions as well. So during the summer, again, the summer is our biggest season because young people are out of school and have more time to dedicate to out of school time programming. The programs are typically 6 to 7 weeks, and they meet 4 or 5 days a week, depending on the program. So that's our most intensive period of programming. During the school year, it typically looks more like 3 days a week with a couple of hours of meeting each one of those days, and they meet for 10-week sessions. So right now we're in the midst of our fall session, and then we have a spring session that starts mid-February and goes through mid-May. Again, 10 weeks, several days a week for a few hours each of those days.
Do you track them after when they finish the program?
Yes.
Like, how do you follow through with them, or do they come back to the program after?
So I think anecdotally, lots of teams come back. They send us updates and that kind of thing. We're working on doing a better job of building our alumni base, because there's so many ASM teams that go on to do so much great work, that we've done some work to keep in touch with them through our alumni kind of association, but we want to do more of that to bring back ASM teams a lot of them end up being instructors for us in some cases. So teens who've been in program for periods through their high school career have gone off and studied some more and then come back and actually instruct programs. I think that's a nice, happy story. But we do track information about their college going rates and that kind of thing, and have found that ASM teens tend to go on to college and graduate at higher levels than like peers. And so that's something to be really proud of. But that's an area that we're really working on, doing more to keep in touch with alumni, to track alumni, to have alumni stay involved after their time with ASM has come to an end.
Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you for your time. And I'm so glad that you're able to do all these programs. I have I have teenagers as well, and a lot of their siblings or their friends have done these programs and have really enjoyed After School Matters program. So thank you. I think we're ready for the next speaker, Megan.
Thanks. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you
Our
so
next
much.
speaker is Ramael Ohiomoba. She's from the Northwestern University School of Medicine in Evanston. She received the AAUW Selected Professions Fellowship, and her discipline is health and medical sciences. And her research is investigating biological and social risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Ramael is a rising fourth-year student at Northwestern University School of Medicine. Before entering medical school, she received a master's in public health with a concentration in epidemiology from Columbia University. Over the next year, she will continue various research projects investigating biological and social risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Take it away, Ramael.
Thank you so much. Just go ahead and start the slideshow. So as she said, I'm Ramael Ohiomoba. I am a fourth-year medical student here at Northwestern University in the Chicago campus. And my research interest is investigating the biological and social risk factors for cardiovascular disease. In the last few years, I've kind of sort of honed in on looking at cardiac transplantation. So I was going to talk to you today about one of my last project that I worked on, and then go into a little bit about future areas where I want to pursue going forward. So the last project I worked on was heart transplant outcomes in amyloid cardiomyopathy. So what is amyloid cardiomyopathy? So amyloidosis is a disease that occurs when your body, for an unknown reason, we haven't been able to figure out why it happens, but it starts to develop and deposit these abnormal proteins called amyloid. And we're not really quite sure what the function of that protein is. We think it might play some role in early neuronal development, but we're really not quite sure. But these proteins can deposit anywhere in the body. So the kidney cause kidney failure, the lungs cause shortness of breath and things of that nature. Or some people will see it in their neurons or their nerves and see this sort of carpal tunnel syndrome in both wrists is a classic presentation, but I personally am interested in cardiology, so I'm interested in how it affects the heart. And you see here in the corner, you see a depiction of a normal heart, and then a heart with these amyloid deposits put in there. And as you can imagine, that can disrupt your heart's normal functioning and cause arrhythmias or irregular heartbeats, or even lead to heart failure. So the inability of your heart to pump and move blood throughout your body as it's supposed to. And for the patients that end up in end stage heart failure, heart transplant is the definitive treatment for these patients. But it's quite controversial, really, because previously amyloid has had not great prognosis. It's had such a high mortality and bad prognosis that scientists or the medical community might argue that patients with amyloid shouldn't receive heart transplants because heart transplants are very difficult to come about. The supply does not come anywhere near meeting the demand. And so they've argued that since these outcomes are so suboptimal, that these patients maybe are not the best candidates for this supply. So my research was kind of looking into that, with the background being around 2010 or so, treatment options for amyloid have drastically improved. So things like chemotherapy or certain drugs, I don't know if you're familiar with tafamidis or things of that nature, have really led to improvements in outcomes for these patients. So I wanted to kind of look at how cardiac transplant outcomes in patients with amyloid have changed over time. In my study population, we looked at the United Network for Organ Sharing Registry, and that's the biggest, or actually the primary transplant registry for all organs in this country. And we're interested in adults, but people from the years 1987 to 2018 who have received single organ heart transplants. And so we're comparing patients with amyloid cardiomyopathy and patients without amyloid cardiomyopathy. But what we found to be more interesting is breaking these patients down into cohorts based off when they received transplants. Because as I mentioned, in around 2010, treatment options improved drastically. So we were curious to see if, based on when these patients receive these transplants, you would see sort of differences in outcomes and maybe sort of address the concerns for these patients receiving transplants. Something else that was quite important for us to look at were racial differences, particularly in African-American patients, because we have discovered that there is one particular mutation in the gene is called the transthyretin gene, but Black patients have that much more commonly, and it leads to them being more represented in amyloid patients. But it also, if you have that mutation and you develop amyloidosis because of that, it leads to worse prognosis. So that was something else that was important for us to look at as well. And we also want to look at association of adverse events and for patients with amyloid cardiomyopathy. So particularly hospitalization for infection, rejection requiring hospitalization for treatment, and functional capacity, because you're getting a transplant, but are you still able to carry out your activities of daily living and return to work and have a functional status of life that is sort of what was expected. So what we found is, first we just looked at the general population without separating by when these individuals got transplants. And as you would expect, the red line is people without amyloid, the blue line is people with amyloid. And as you can see, people without amyloid, their survival was better. And when we adjusted confoundings, when we adjusted other variables that may play a role, such as gender, age, ethnicity, sickness, this was a significant difference between these two populations. But again, we were more interested in the era and seeing how that played into those outcomes. And looking at this graph here, A and B are the individuals transplanted before 2000 and between 2000 and 2010, that 2010 year, again, being that year around when treatment options got a lot better. And you see that there is a difference between those two groups that kind of goes away in the C category, and those are people who were transplanted after 2010. And then we looked again, as I mentioned, at the differences in ethnicity. And we actually surprisingly found that Black patients had a higher survival. So they did better in terms of survival than their white counterparts. And it was similar to those Black patients with amyloid did better than their white counterparts with amyloid, but it was similar to patients without amyloid. It was quite surprising for us. We weren't really expecting that, but we sort of hypothesized two reasons why this could occur. So the first one being that even though this transthyretin mutation leads to worse prognosis, the people with the transthyretin mutation often only have amyloidosis in their heart, and they don't really have those extra cardiac manifestations of amyloid. As I mentioned before, the their nerve involvement or the lung involvement or the kidney, they can have it, but it's not as common. And so you would expect perhaps that for those patients to receive a heart transplant, that would have a more significant effect on their outcomes because it's primarily just the heart in which their amyloid is confined to. The second thing we hypothesize is just due to the social injustice that has occurred in our society, Black patients weren't really receiving as many transplants pre that 2010 cutoff that we used, and they were receiving more, they started receiving more after that 2010 cutoff. And as I mentioned, that 2010 cutoff coincided with better treatment options. And so it's almost a coincidence that because they were receiving more transplants after 2010, those patients did better. And then when we look at those other adverse outcomes that I was speaking about before, there's actually no difference. And so overall, it goes to show that we should maybe change the way we view transplantation, cardiac transplantation in these patients, especially with these new treatment options that are available for amyloid. And additionally, given the fact that advancements are constantly being made going forward. So we would hypothesize that this would just get better. But I wanted to also take a little bit of time and talk about why I'm so passionate about heart transplantation from the lens of inequity, particularly as it addresses women in this space, just because I'm presenting at the AAUW. So I mentioned before that heart transplantation is an established therapy for end-stage heart failure, and donor organs are very scarce. So the demand, the need for transplants completely outweighs the amount of organs that are available for transplantation. And therefore, it's very important that we have fair and equitable access amongst all individuals. Women in particular have not fared so well in this realm of heart transplantation. So they receive less than 25% of heart transplants, even though they have similar prevalence of heart failure as men and higher mortality than men. Why is the big question that's been asked? This is an area where much more research is necessary. And we don't really have a good answer, but we do have a lot of hypotheses if you look into the literature. So they're less likely to be transplanted and more likely to die or be removed from the wait list because of deterioration in health while on the wait list. And we think one thing that may contribute is obviously a multifaceted issue, but one thing that may contribute to this is societally imposed gender roles and lack of caregiver support that might dissuade women from pursuing heart transplantation. So there's actually research that shows that when offered heart transplant, women are more likely to refuse than men. Another thing that may play into this is referral and selection bias. So there's research that shows that when women have female attendings, a female cardiologist, they are more likely to pursue further diagnostic workup and to accept the interventions that are advised to them. But cardiology is a very difficult field to get into, and there are so few women in cardiology. And so the imbalance between the female cardiology providers and female patients exists. And finally, women have been shown to present more acutely and at a sicker stage. And so they lead to more urgent listings, and they sometimes present too sick for transplant and basically miss that optimal window in which they are sick enough to be qualified to receive a transplant, but not too sick to be seen as someone who would optimally benefit from that transplant. And so one thing I do want to address, so the prior thought had been that women, when transplanted, would not do as well. So their outcomes weren't as good as men. And research has shown that to not be the case at all. So post-transplant survival is actually equivalent between men and women when you take into account differences in recipient and donor characteristics. So what that's really trying to say is that when women are matched appropriately, so women transplant recipients are matched appropriately with donors, they do just as well as men. And actually, compared with male recipients, female recipients were more likely to be younger and have lower prevalence of comorbidities, such as diabetes, hypertension, peripheral vascular disease, a history of smoking, and ischemic cardiomyopathy. So this is really an area where a lot more research and a lot more attention is needed to sort of unpack this inequity and lead to better outcomes for women. And I did just want to go back to this picture I have here. So the disparities in cardiac health between men and women are quite well known, not just in heart transplantation and things of that nature, but also even in heart attacks. So much so that there's now every year on the first Friday in February, this next coming up will be February 4th, 2022. There's the Go Red for Women Day, in which it's just a day to build awareness. So wear red and donate to causes or donate to organizations that are leading causes of research and care provisions for women. And so I just wanted to take a second to draw attention to that day as well. And these are my sources. And so I'll pause to see if anyone has any questions for me.
Okay, thank you so much. We do have a bunch of questions. One question is the percentage of this, what is the percentage of this disease in the overall population? That's a
great question. So amyloid is, I simplified this a little bit for the talk, but there are so many different types of amyloid. So I talked about transthyretin a little bit, but the real answer is, as a whole, we really do not know.
You can't
so
know.
Actually, pardon?
Yeah, you can't know, right? I mean,
yes.
If someone has it, you don't know, right?
Exactly. And actually, people are seeing posthumously when they go back and look at hearts, they will see disease in patients that hadn't even been diagnosed. So there are figures out, but for amyloid as a whole, particularly transthyretin, we don't have those exact figures.
Another question is, aren't amyloids also implicated in Alzheimer's? You probably see the question there too.
Yes, it is implicated in Alzheimer's as well. So there is believed to be a connection between the two, but the amyloid that I'm talking about is a little bit different than that. So the amyloid that is implicated in Alzheimer's, it doesn't affect the body in the same way. The amyloid I'm talking about is when usually like middle age, it increases as you get older, but patients start to present with deposits of these proteins in various parts of their body. And so, for example, for cardiac amyloidosis, these patients will often present with like heart failure symptoms, whereas they can't walk very far without being able to get short of breath, or they'll start getting those arrhythmias we talked about. But yes, so that is also a different form of amyloid.
The next question, is there a push to have more female cardiologists, or do you have any recommendations on how we can encourage more people to go into, more women to go into cardiology? Or
yes, there absolutely is a push to get more female cardiologists. Cardiology is a very difficult field to get into. It takes, so for example, I'm now my 4th year of medical school. I will do 3 years of internal medicine residency. And if I do go on to become a cardiologist, I would do 3 years of cardiology. And say I want to take care of these patients with heart failure. That's an extra 2 years of advanced heart failure fellowship. So I think it's a very long path, but more so there aren't many women now. So when you don't really see yourself in the field, the people who look like you in the field, you're less likely to go into it. And so there's already so many pushes in terms of like pipeline programs. We do a lot of mentorship programs at Northwestern to get more women in the field. At Northwestern, they've actually done quite a good job of having more women cardiologists that I am personally being mentored by. But even fellowships are sort of looking at that now in terms of the candidates that they're accepting into their fellowship, to make sure that the candidates that they're accepting better represent the populations they're serving in terms of gender, ethnicity, things of that nature.
I have a question separate than what is typed on the chat. So how did you hear about the AAUW fellowship, and how has it helped you this year with your studies?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually my sister told me about the AAUW fellowship, and I looked on the website and I saw another at the time medical student, but now she's an OB-GYN resident on there. So I was like, oh, maybe it might be a good thing for someone like me to go into, particularly given like the health disparities that exist in cardiology for women, and the fact that I'm interested in cardiology. And so having funding from an organization, first of all, just being a part of an organization like the AAUW for me is so inspirational. Listening to the presentation that was given right before me, knowing that people like that exist, that are out there changing our communities, having all of these phenomenal women mentors to look to who are doing all these awesome things. And so that's separate from the funding, but just to have that support and have those inspirational people they can look at to sort of see like the women out here changing the world. And then the funding support really does help out students to sort of not have to focus on that aspect. So rather than trying to figure out ways to finance their education, they're able to focus their efforts on discovering their passions, figuring out how to be like you all and change the world in our own respect. So I can go on and on about how funding from the AAUW and being part of this organization has changed me in particular, but I'm very
good. No, I'm glad that we're so glad that it is. And that's why we love hearing these stories. There's 2 more questions. Well, you can see it. Is there any connection between dietary protein and amyloidosis, or is there something you're born with, or is it something that happens onset when you're an adult?
So no to the first question. So well, I would say not to our knowledge. Again, this is an area where we need a lot more research, but dietary protein to our knowledge, does not at all affect your likelihood of getting amyloid. So eat all the protein you want, don't worry about that. Is it something that you're born with? Yes, in a sense. So as I mentioned, there are quite a few mutations that are prevalent in different populations. I talked about transthyretin in the Black population, but there are quite a few other mutations as well. And so if your family member or a parent has been diagnosed with amyloid, that is something that we do recommend you get some genetic counseling to look to see if you also have one of the mutations that would put you at risk. But for the general population, such genetic counseling is not something we recommend. We really only recommend it in individuals for whom a family member has been diagnosed. And to answer that last question about, is it something you get as you're older? So there's actually a type of amyloid, actually the transthyretin, that's called senile amyloid, because it is more likely to present as you age. They're trying to move away from that word senile because it's not the most politically correct term, but yes, there is an association between age and amyloidosis.
All right, the last question is, so you were talking about how lengthy the cardiology program is. And so someone asks, is there any flexibility if women who start this program to be a doctor want to start their families and whatnot in the midst of all this while you're trying to be in these programs, or most women seem to wait until be an older mother because of all this schooling and programs that you're in?
It's a great question. So I will say that I haven't done the data, I haven't done the analysis myself, but if you were to look at the age at which women who are interested or women who go into cardiology have children, I would not at all be surprised if you'd find that it is significantly older than the average woman. However, as more and more women enter these programs, so cardiology fellowships, they get more leadership opportunities, and more women enter fellowship and training and have babies and children while in training. Again, the representation matters. So it makes it easier for women entering to see someone who's had a child during training and think that's okay, or a woman who kind of knows how difficult training was for them and how much they desire to have a child, make policies that make it better and easier for the women entering after to have children. So even at Northwestern, these are things that they even address during fellowship. They'll pair you with someone who may have had a child or things of that nature. So it's getting a lot better, but it's nowhere near we need to be. And that's why having organizations like AAUW is so important, just having people there advocating for the issues that pertain to women in these spaces. Just can only make it better for people in my generation, people who haven't even thought about medicine yet, who are coming up, who may be dissuaded for the reasons that you mentioned.
Great. Thank you so much. This is very, very interesting. Thank you, Ramael. I appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Megan?
Hi. Our next speaker is Jenny Lopez Alvarado. She has a master's in social work from Loyola University Chicago, and she received the AAUW Career Development Grant, and her discipline is social work. And her research is on mental health in the Latinx population. And she received the award in 2020 to 2021. And her degrees and specialization of Master's of Social Work, Bilingual Mental Health for the Immigrant Population. Jenny Lopez's area of interest is mental health in the Latinx population, with special emphasis on the effects of trauma among immigrant women and girl survivors of domestic violence. For almost 2 decades, her unyielding commitment and advocacy has helped domestic violence survivors from underserved communities in the United States and her native home of Colombia. By getting her Master's of Social Work degree, she will bring much needed culturally appropriate and trauma-informed mental health services to Latinx communities. Jenny?
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, everyone. It's a privilege for me to be here today. I'm very grateful for my award, and let me share my presentation. Can you guys see it? Yes, okay, perfect. So my name is Jenny Lopez, and I'm currently studying my MSW. Is the first bilingual MSW in the country, and is focusing bilingual mental health and immigration studies. It's an online program, so I'm currently residing in North Carolina, where I work at the 30th Judicial District Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Alliance, and I am the Immigrant Outreach Program Director. So this award, I think, means a lot for me and for my family and my community. I am a Latina immigrant from Colombia, and I am in my 40s. I'm the mother of 2 children, 2 amazing boys, one with special needs. And I studied my bachelor's in psychology in Colombia. And then I had the opportunity to go to Spain to get a master's in intervention for family violence. And for all these years, that has been my work, like supporting survivors of domestic violence with trauma-informed care. But when I came to the United States, I found out that it wasn't possible to do the equivalency of my degrees here. So I have to start all over again. So it's a challenge because English is not my first language, and I am a full-time employee and a mother. So I'm very, very grateful that I found this program and that AAUW is supporting me. I think that's is a huge motivation to keep doing what I'm doing. So my area of interest is mental health in the Latinx population. I'm referring here to the Latinx population. Usually you hear this Hispanic or Latino, but Latinx is a term that means inclusion. So we include like all the genders of the people who identify as Latino, Latina, or Hispanic. And usually is used among the academic field. But if you talk to the community, just the new generation is starting to use Latinx. The older generation use Hispanic or Latino. So my special interest is trauma among immigrant women and girl survivors of domestic violence. And I have found that there are so many barriers for this community and to access services. When a survivor comes to our services, we find out that it's very difficult for them to file a police report or to go to court. When you don't have the language and you are not aware of the resources, like you fell behind in the system. Like it's not the same that as if a white woman who knows English and has immigration status is a victim of domestic violence, that an immigrant woman who doesn't know English or doesn't have any immigration status. So it's very difficult for them to access services, and you see this across the world. When you are an immigrant in any part of the world, it's very difficult to access these specific services and also high quality services. So this is the work I'm doing right now. This agency is in far western North Carolina, and the agency works with other agencies to build capacity, but also to serve special populations. So in the agency that I'm currently working right now, they have advocacy for older people, for people with disabilities, for veterans, for children exposed to violence, and for the immigrant community. And all the services are for victims of crime, especially domestic violence and sexual assault. This is where I work right now. This is the far western part of North Carolina. It's a very rural area. We don't have public transportation. We are in the mountains, so it's very difficult to access some points of some counties of the state. And when you think about survivors of domestic violence, usually what happens is that the immigrants come from another country, and the offender here, sometimes intentionally, we have seen that they choose this area to bring the victim because it's very isolated, it's very difficult to access resources, and most of the referrals we have are from schools, because the only point of access that the women have is when they go to school to bring their children, so the teacher notices that something is wrong with them or the children. So we have a lot of obstacles here and challenges in this area. And I think this is a trend. This is for far western North Carolina, but I think it's a trend on many other rural communities in the United States. We have seen an increase of the immigrant population, the Latinx immigrant population, like for 241%. And these are all the counties I work in. And the problem is that we have seen this grow, but we have a gap of services. So we have seen the growth, but we don't have the services to provide to the victims of crime. And if you log in the directory of all the agencies that serve survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, you will find only 2 agencies in the area that serve this population for 7 counties. So mostly the barriers that we found are, as I say, language barriers, and then awareness of the services we have. Some of the women are not eligible for services because they lack documentation, immigration status, and also racial and cultural bias. We live in the South, and there are some organizations and some staff in those organizations that are not well trained in the culturally appropriate services. So those are the barriers that some of the women face to access services. And what are the needs, and what is my project, and what I'm working right now? The need is for advocacy and trauma-informed services. As I say, it's not the same woman who's victim of domestic violence, not gonna access the same services as another person who is from this country and knows English. So with an intersectionality lens, knowing that everyone is unique with their own culture background, and that defines how the oppression that they're gonna find in the system, it's important to advocate for language access. So for example, I have been part of the Office of Victims of Crime at the federal level. I'm part of a language access grant, and we advocate for other agencies that receive federal funding to really promote or to make sure that they offer language access to victims of crime. So by Title VI, it's an obligation for them to offer language access. And it's incredible, but some organizations that receive federal funding, like law enforcement or hospitals or schools, here in this part of the country, they are not aware or they choose not to implement these services. So we here in this area, for example, only have like 4 ESL teachers, like for so many schools, and it's very difficult for the families to communicate with them or with the school system in general. The other area is legal services. Sometimes we realize that when the victim at the moment that the crime occurs go through the legal system and has to face like law enforcement and the court system, some of the attorneys that they work with, they are not trauma informed, and you can encounter like re-victimization for these women, because anything that you say for a person who just has experienced trauma can re-traumatize them. You can re-victimize them. The other area is bilingual mental health. So for this area, we only have 3 bilingual licensed mental health providers, and only 1 is a native speaker. So hopefully I'm gonna be the 4th one, and that's very excited. So, but it's a huge deal. Like for 7 counties, it's very difficult to find a bilingual mental health provider. And I think it's also something that you will find in other parts of the country, especially in rural areas. Not many people want to move to rural areas. Here we work with a university that have a social work program, and we are encouraging Latina students, since they are in high school, to go into the field so we can provide more services for the area. But usually what happens is that when they finish here at the university, they look for jobs in other parts of the country, because the payment, of course, is better in other parts of the country, and they have more opportunities. Another area important is access to high quality services. I work with another organization that provide healthcare for immigrants, especially farm workers. And when I start working with the organization, what I realized is that the quality of the services wasn't as the same as the standards for another community. So I've been advocating for them, like, for example, with the interpretation, like the medical providers were using just any volunteer to do any medical interpretation. And as you know, that could be like really dangerous, because if you, as an interpreter, if you are not a certified medical interpreter and you can tell something to a patient, like you can take this medicine twice a week and it was twice a month, like it could have a really bad impact in the patient. So I've been advocated for that quality of services and for some standards that we have here that usually in our community, everything is, and we are very grateful for our volunteers, but usually like a lot of the services we have are just relied on volunteers. So we are pushing for a higher quality of services. And that means like we need more funding also in the area so we can provide that. Trauma-informed care, I think this is the key to work with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, so they can have safety, they can have choice. When they have been in relationships that have been so abusive, they don't have a voice, they don't have a choice. And especially if you talk to immigrant women, you realize that they have suffered trauma before migration, during migration, and after migration. So in a trauma-informed care model, we give them the choice, like what they want to do, what are the options that they can choose from, and especially safety, that's the first one. Collaboration, because we need to collaborate with law enforcement, with the legal system, with the health departments, and also the trustworthiness and empowerment for the community. I have noticed that in the work that I've been doing here, that if the community don't trust you, like you cannot work with the community, because of some of the people don't have legal status. It's very difficult for them to trust any organization or anyone. They always think that they're gonna report them to immigration. And so it's very important to just do that one-on-one work with the community. and also empowerment. As I say, like usually our community don't haven't had that voice, and here we give them voice to also become an advocate for other immigrants. I always say here where I work, like even if we don't provide the service if a person comes and we don't provide the service that they need, we always listen to them and we refer them to a proper service and we follow up with them because that's giving them dignity. And finally, trauma-focused therapy, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm in my second year of my MSW. I'm doing my clinical internship, and I think that's really what's gonna be my focus. The dream is to create a model for trauma-focused therapy, especially for the immigrant community. I know there are so many out there, but it's very difficult for our community to access those services in Spanish. So that's what I'm trying to do, to specialize in those therapies. At the moment, for example, I'm doing my internship with children, and I'm working with the Santre therapy. That is, since trauma sits usually in the right side of the brain, sometimes therapists use like left brain therapies or techniques for something that is in your right side of the brain. That usually the left side of the brain is more language and logical, and the right side of the brain is where the emotions and the memory are. So when you have been a victim and you have experienced a trauma, your memories and your emotions are gonna be in that right side. So all the activities that are hands-on, like movement and expressive therapies, arts and trade, those are the ones that will help you to integrate the information so you can process all the emotions from the trauma. And this is my last slide. Like, as I say, like there are only 3 identified licensed bilingual mental health providers. And so I hope to become one of them. I'm gonna be graduating in May. And then after that, I can apply for my LCSWA and do my 2 years of 3,000 hours. And after that, I can be a fully licensed clinical social worker. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a few questions. Oh, someone said congratulations on your upcoming graduation. That's very exciting. So a question is, if a woman is sexually assaulted, is abortion available in your area, or would the victim culturally even want this type of service?
That's a very good question. I think with the community I work with, is the Latinx community, their values are always so strong, like the family values, that is very difficult. It's not that we don't have the service, because I know there are services where they can go and safely have the abortion, but the family system, it's gonna be a big challenge for them, because usually the family, if they are aware of what happened, they are very religious. They have very religious values. So it's gonna be a challenge for them. But obviously, like any woman who has been a victim of sexual assault or domestic violence, we support them in any choice that they want to make. And we work through those beliefs and traditions from the culture and how to process those challenges.
Another question is, how much care is provided to the children if the family is experiencing a major trauma? That's got to be difficult too.
Yeah, we realize that we need to work with the children, so we don't only provide the services for a woman, we always include the family. When children have been exposed to violence, they have a higher risk of many other behaviors, not necessarily that they're gonna become offenders themselves, but you can see some change in behaviors at school, at home. So we always work with children. We provide bilingual mental health services through play therapy.
I have a question. Are you going to stay in North Carolina after you finish your degree, or are you looking to go back to Columbia or a different part of the country?
That's a very good question because I have moved a lot through my life. So I don't know. I don't know. For now, I know that I'm here. When I'm finished my degree, I'm gonna be here in North Carolina. But since I know the need is so big and my dream is to work to support the Latinx community anywhere. I'm gonna stay in the United States, but it could be anywhere in the United States. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Here's a question. Are you working with the men, the male aggressors? Or is there programs for them?
So because we are grant funded and all our grants specifically say that we can only support the victims, women victims of the crime, or usually there are some same-sex couples, or there is also like violence against the men, like the woman is the offender and the man is the victim. So we can only work with the victim of the crime. So our organization don't work with the man, with the offenders, but there are other organizations, but unfortunately there's nothing in Spanish for them. So it's a challenge for the offenders, like they cannot access any, in this area, any AA treatment or NA treatment or any, the 26 program treatment that is for offenders of domestic violence. They usually have to go, they have to drive 2 hours from here. What we do is we try to engage in the community when we provide outreach. We engage the parents, usually through the school, and we do like parenting skill groups. So we provide some information just as prevention, but we don't work with the offenders.
Then we just have one last comment, and someone said, thank you so much for doing this work in such a challenging environment. And she's just saying any progress can certainly help save lives. Oh, here's one more question. When you engage in the trauma therapy, about how long do the victims help and stay in the program and the therapy? It could be a long time.
Yes, that's an excellent question. And we always talk here, I talk with my coworkers because especially in an agency for domestic violence, you will see, and working with immigrants, there are so many needs. So it's not just mental health needs, but there are legal needs, immigration needs, there are different cases, and then with the children. So it's usually a very long-term process. There are therapies that you can do that usually are the manualized therapies, like for 16 sessions or 26 sessions. But the reality is that we combine mental health and advocacy, and it's a long-term process. So I have seen clients that come to the agency for years, like just to receive services. But usually it depends on the kind of therapy you provide. And right now in my internship, what I'm doing is a model, is a trauma-focused play-based model, and it usually requires 20 sessions for the kids, but it can take more time also.
Well, one more question. Is criminal justice involved with your services?
Yes, all the time. Since the crime happens, we go to the police station and file the report. And then usually what happens is they provide the victim files for a protection order. And the first part is an ex parte that is only for 10 days. Then you have to go to court for a more permanent one. And we are along the victim in the whole process. And if there are criminal charges, because the DVPO is considered civil charges, if there are criminal charges, for example, if the domestic violence happened in front of the kids, there is a criminal case also that is open. So we work with the district attorney, and we work with all the attorneys, especially from legal aid, that are pro bono attorneys. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to thank all of our presenters today. And there were so many more AAUW Fellows from Illinois that we wish we could have heard from today, but we would be online all day because there was about 15 of them. But there's 250 women across the country that did receive grants and scholarships and fellowships this year. So we want to thank all of them for all of their hard work. And I want to thank everybody for coming today.